everyone. I sort of got brought into this as a sort of non-urbanist, and I felt like a bit of an imposter sometimes. And I've always thought my path into this sort of space after doing corporate innovation consulting was a bit different and quirky. And then chatting to lots of people yesterday, I was like, ooh, most people in this room have had a sort of slightly different and quirky path into this kind of scene. So it's made me feel very comfortable. But what I want to talk to you about today is I spent my time doing corporate innovation work, so helping big organizations do new things, products, services, experiences, ventures. And I kind of hate what innovation has become. So my sort of thesis is actually we need to be getting much more comfortable with being more interestingly less wrong. So talking about mistakes, play, and a little embarrassment is actually what makes cities and companies great. Quick plug, if you don't listen to the podcast, scan that QR code and become a subscriber. But our pursuit of perfection is effectively this conspiracy against progress. So we have become, in innovation, whether that's in urbanism, whether it's in corporate organizations, kind of obsessed with the process, trusting the process, thinking if we just follow this linear process and do these activities, we will get the perfect innovation outcome. I think it's bullshit. I think it's actually us trying to be designing to be not blamed rather than to be right. There is no perfection. There is no single correct answer to basically anything. There are multiple versions of right answers. We're just not chasing them because we're spending all of our time trying to not be blamed when something goes a bit wonky. But everything in innovation, almost everything in urbanism, has gone a bit wonky at some point. These are the press reviews of the Eiffel Tower in 1887. Parisians called it a monstrosity. The global press jumped on it and ridiculed Paris for building this ridiculous thing. Can you imagine Paris today without the Eiffel Tower? Probably not. In the corporate world, and I picked on Starbucks because I think it's got a good link to urbanism, but the Frappuccino was called by the CEO of Starbucks as an unserious product. Well, why did it make billions of dollars in revenue for Starbucks? If we picked on Paris, went back a few years, last time I was in Paris and I cycled there, it was absolutely fucking terrifying. A few years ago, people were ridiculing the mayor, berating the mayor, being like, we are not a cycling city, this is not going to work, how dare you do this? Kind of has worked, although Chris and Melissa tell me it is still quite scary to cycle in Paris if you're not prepared to go quickly. But we have this thing of we're effectively designing the cheese pizza of innovation, whether it's in corporates or whether it's in urbanism. Don't get me wrong, I like a cheese pizza. Most people would not complain about a cheese pizza. Unless you don't do gluten and don't do lactose, then you probably have some problems with a cheese pizza. But you would never probably choose one. You probably want different toppings, you want a different selection. But we end up picking cheese pizzas because we don't want to offend anyone, we don't want to get anything wrong. No one remembers eating a cheese pizza unless you're Kevin from Home Alone in the back of a limo. But this is our urban equivalent of the cheese pizza. There is nothing objectively wrong or blamable about that bus stop. There is a thing that tells you what buses will stop there. There is a thing that will tell you what time roughly they will turn up. There's somewhere to sort of sit or perch. There's some shade, there's some shelter, and there's a bin to put your empty soda bottle in. Cool. Nothing about that screams desirable consumer product. Nothing about that says, today I'm going to take the bus rather than driving my car. So, rather than following processes that we're not wrong and we can't be blamed, I think innovation is all about taking inspiration from the strange places. So, quickly a few. Sport, we've had iteration and marginal gains. So things like nutrition, things like equipment, things like training, things like tactics, all compound to create champions. Then we have Lego, so you build something, you break something, you remix something, and you rebuild something with play, which is a way that we get to new combinations. Jazz was called the devil's music, originally in the 20s and 30s, but it's effectively a structure that enables improvisation. And those mistakes end up becoming the melodies, and that's why you actually want to listen to jazz music, because they're playing it imperfectly rather than perfectly. And one of my favorites is pirates. So Sam Conniff wrote a book called Be More Pirate, which is effectively what large organizations could learn from the golden age of piracy, which was effectively, in times of peace, pirate ships were incredibly liberal, incredibly democratic, incredibly inclusive places, especially for the 17th and 18th centuries. When you spotted a ship on the horizon, and there was a chance of going and getting booty, suddenly, the captain, who you would put there as a democratically elected person, they became an autocratic dictator. And you fucking did what they told you, otherwise you were walking the plank. So, I think there's a new scene that we should be looking at for inspiration for innovation, which is kink. Bear with me, bear with me. But the kink scene, I think, is fascinating for helping people explore things that are a little bit embarrassing, a little bit taboo, might involve a little bit of shame, the sort of thing that you probably wouldn't tell your mother or your best friend or your neighbor about. Something like 60% of Gen Zs have engaged in kink-based play or would like to engage in kink-based play. So, whereas it's something like 9% with boomers, prudes. But I think it's fascinating, not for the shock or the taboo factor, but for actually how do you get great kink play? And it's really about 2 or more people coming together, communicating a fantasy, sharing their limits, setting those limits, agreeing a safe word, having an out, and then going and playing and see what happens. Throughout that, it's safe, it's consensual, it's secure. At the end of that, you then have aftercare. So there's a hug, there's a cuddle, you talk about what you liked, what you didn't like, what you might want to do more of, what you might want to do less of, what you might want to do next time. And actually, that's critically important when it comes to what we do in our work. Because nothing novel and innovative ever really feels respectable at the start. And our favorite cities are inherently messy, flawed, and a bit kinky. I'm going to throw out a few examples. This is Tirana in Albania. So coming out of the communist era, typical kind of scene, drab communist sort of apartment blocks. Not inherently wrong, actually relatively decent places to live, just a bit bland and boring. There wasn't a lot of money to do something with them, so the mayor of Tirana handed out paint to people, and they painted murals, they painted the buildings bright colors, and it became a slightly nicer place to live. They then did that same sort of thing in Hodges Mausoleum Memorial. That's now like a startup hub. The color has transitioned from the drab apartment blocks to actually what's a really interesting building. And then, now the capital is flowing into Tirana, you have buildings like that, which are not perfect. The ground space down at the bottom of it is kind of meh, but that is fascinating. That's a really interesting piece of architecture that we enjoy going to see and people take pictures of. Dakar in Senegal has this, where on the street level you have sort of ingenuity and experimentation. So you have amazing fashion scenes, amazing music scenes. You have an amazing transportation scene. So while the government has built rail corridors, while they built BRT lines, you then have the informal economy connecting them up. Montreal, the place I call home, has festivals when it's minus 15 outside, when everyone else is sort of staying inside and trying to be warm. Instead, you're going out, looking at lights, having a drink, dancing when it's February and absolutely Baltic out. And then really boring places, like Zurich, wonderfully livable, quite dull. But the Swiss do a few things quite well. So things like participatory budgeting, shared decision-making, cooperative housing. Some of those things hark back to what I was talking about in kink, of communication, discussion, the structure in which you're then allowed to play, and it's participatory for that play. So the smallest thing that we can do right now is the thing that's going to take us to the biggest possible futures that we haven't imagined. I will go back to Paris again. Paris Plage in 2002, dump a load of sand by the side of the Seine and the highway. Nobody imagined back then that in 23 years' time people would be swimming in the Seine. Swimming in the Seine is probably still a bit gross and completely imperfect, but we had to do that to get to that. If you took Shibuya Crossing in Japan, I don't know if this is the truth not getting in the way of a good story here, but what I'm told is that the first thing they tried was just saying, let everybody cross at the same time and see what happens. Not only did that work, it became an icon of the city. And this works in the corporate world as well. The waffle cone was invented at the St. Louis World Fair when somebody ran out of cups and a nearby waffle vendor said, how about we push these into a cone and put ice cream in them? Bailey's, the 10th biggest alcoholic spirit in the world, was designed by a guy in 30 minutes based upon what he could buy in the convenience store below his office in Soho. The original Toyota Prius was absolutely crap, but it was the start of us moving into EVs. And Instagram was originally this check-in thing called Bourbon. But I want to leave you with a word of warning, which is me picking on Toronto because that's how I first got into this scene. Toronto does public consultations about public consultations. They spend nearly 200 hours doing these public consultations. And what we have in Canada is stuff like this. The King Street pilot in Toronto. Not a bad idea. But we did the pilot, and then for 7 years we've just kept doing the pilot. Avenue Montreal in Montreal. Wonderful. I like a street that doesn't have cars. I like to bike down it. I like to sit on a patio. I like to have a drink. I like to have a walk down it. It opens the city up. But every year, it just looks like a pop-up. We've never done anything more with it. Whereas Berlin did incrementally better things with Alexanderplatz, and the Barcelona superblocks were the story of trying lots of things multiple different times. So, the awkward start is always exciting, but it's the repetition that makes it transformative. So if we go back to that analogy of kink, it's the thing of dip your toe in the water, give it a try. You probably find some things that you didn't know you previously liked. You try it again and again, and you do different things, and you open up to more stuff. So it's the repetition of doing it that makes it transformative, both for our personal lives, our sex lives, and our cities. To being challenges. Thank you so much.